Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 450 CE. The good news? You still have a roof over your head. The bad news? That roof leaks, the roads outside are crumbling, and no one in Italy has a clue who's really in charge anymore. Rome isn't gone, but it isn't quite alive either. It's fading. You can hear it in the creaking aqueduct. You can feel it in the empty stalls at the market. So, how do you survive in a world where the empire itself is slipping away beneath your feet? What happens when the empire that once bragged about armies that could smash anything in their path can't even keep its own fields safe? You find out the hard way. You step outside your villa, listening for the usual sounds of distant marching boots or the metallic rattle of shields. Instead, what you hear are crows and the wind in broken hedges. The frontier feels far too close now. You live in Italy itself, the beating heart of the empire, but suddenly the outside world doesn't feel far away anymore. It feels like it's standing at your door, heavy boots on your gravel path, waiting for the night to fall. You notice soldiers sometimes, but they don't look like the ones you grew up imagining. No bronze armor, no disciplined lines practicing maneuvers in the fields, no polished centurion barking orders in Latin. These men wear whatever gear they've scraped together. Patches of Roman kit mixed with foreign helmets and rough cloaks. They don't hold formation. They barely hold together. They're mercenaries on imperial payroll, or at least they're supposed to be. Some are former enemies now hired to guard Rome's borders. Others are warbands who only obey their own leaders. From far away, they might still look like an army. Up close, they look like a loose crowd that could vanish the very moment you need them most. You expect to see organized patrols riding past your farm as legionaries once did. Instead, you see federati, foreign allies on shaky contracts that say they'll fight for Rome, but in truth, they fight when it suits them. They don't speak your language fluently. They don't know your customs, and some don't care if your vineyard burns or survives. Their loyalty isn't to Rome's eagle, it's to the gold promised at the end of service. And if that gold runs out or arrives late, as it often does, their loyalty disappears just as fast. Imagine trying to sleep at night knowing the men who are supposed to guard your valley yesterday were raiding villages just like yours 3 years ago. This wasn't always the case. Once, the Roman army lived in disciplined camps, drilled year after year, and held down the empire's borders across rivers like the Rhine and Danube. That balance snapped at the Battle of Adrianople, decades earlier, when Gothic cavalry crushed the pride of the empire and the legions never quite recovered. Since then, Romans filled the ranks with outsiders. Instead of iron discipline, you get uncertain promises. The change left farmers in Italy asking the same question every night. What if trouble comes, and the men in armor aren't really here to help? You expect to see organized patrols riding past your farm as legionaries once did. Instead, you see federati, foreign allies on shaky contracts that say they'll fight for Rome, but in truth, they fight when it suits them. They don't speak your language fluently, they don't know your customs, and some don't care if your vineyard burns or survives. Their loyalty isn't to Rome's eagle, it's to the gold promised at the end of service. And if that gold runs out or arrives late, as it often does, their loyalty disappears just as fast. Imagine trying to sleep at night knowing the men who are supposed to guard your valley yesterday were raiding villages just like yours 3 years ago. This wasn't always the case. Once, the Roman army lived in disciplined camps, drilled year after year, and held down the empire's borders across rivers like the Rhine and Danube. That balance snapped at the Battle of Adrianople, decades earlier, when Gothic cavalry crushed the pride of the empire and the legions never quite recovered. Since then, Romans filled the ranks with outsiders. Instead of iron discipline, you get uncertain promises. The change left farmers in Italy asking the same question every night. What if trouble comes, and the men in armor aren't really here to help? One evening, your worst fear plays out. You wake up to shouts, barking dogs, the slamming of wooden gates. By the time you rush outside, your neighbor's livestock are gone. The tracks lead off toward the woods where no Roman patrol is waiting, because there are no soldiers anymore. Not the kind you think of. He stands there, clutching a broken fence post like it's a weapon, but no one rides in to restore order. No red crests, no disciplined column of troops, not even a single messenger. You feel that hollow anger in your chest. Rome, the empire that boasted it ruled the world, can't protect a cow 2 fields away. The lesson is cruel and simple. Being a Roman citizen doesn't mean what it used to. Citizenship once guaranteed you the strength of the legions, armies that stretched shields from horizon to horizon. It meant your farm sat under the watch of men who could crush barbarian raids before they even touched Italian soil. Now, that promise has rotted. Rome's banners still flap in the wind, but the men beneath them can vanish overnight, their oaths worth as much as the coins they receive. And if the treasury is empty, so are the promises. So who do you actually trust? Your emperor? You might not even know his name this year. The officials in Ravenna or Constantinople. They're far away, and their letters arrive too late. The soldiers in your area, they're just as likely to desert for a richer warlord down the road. Day by day, it becomes clear. The empire's backbone, its legions, has already been pulled apart, and no physician is coming to stitch it together again. By the year 450, the idea of the imperial military as a single shield feels like a story your grandfather told you to comfort himself. What exists instead are pockets of power. A wealthy landowner hires guards and calls it security. A barbarian leader demands tribute and calls it alliance. You can either stay exposed and hope, dangerous, foolish hope, that distant emperors send aid, or you align yourself with whoever has real, local strength. A warlord with his own band of fighters, a noble with a fortified villa, anyone who can raise a wall around you when Rome no longer can. And this shift isn't clean. It means trading certainty for compromise. You give grain instead of taxes. You bend the knee not to an emperor on a golden throne, but to some scarred commander who eats at the same smoky fire as his men. He doesn't wear purple. He doesn't speak of old Roman glory. But at least when wolves, or worse, circle your village, his men actually show up. And that becomes the dark irony of these years. Rome, the empire famous for its unmatched legions, forces ordinary people to put their lives in the hands of whoever is close enough with a sword. The walls of Rome still stand, but out in the countryside, you're protected by someone else's courage, not Rome's. Trust slips from the center to the edges. Security isn't universal. It's personal, tangled in agreements made villa by villa. When an empire can't protect its own fields, farmers like you survive not by clinging to the shadow of old legions, but by leaning on smaller, fragile networks that stretch only as far as you can walk in a single night. Imagine trying to wash off the sweat and grime of the day, but the Roman bathhouse, the very place built for that purpose, is locked, silent, and colder than the stone it's made of. No steam rising, no constant chatter of men talking politics or gossip, no splash of water echoing down the halls, just an empty shell of what it once was. You walk the same streets you always have, expecting to smell the damp warmth of heated air, but instead you catch the stench of rot drifting out from abandoned pipes. For centuries, baths weren't just about staying clean. They were about daily life. They were the gyms, the bars, the community centres. And now, one by one, their doors stay shut. You grew up used to choosing which bathhouse to visit. The larger ones had impressive vaulted ceilings and endless pools. The sound of running water filled the place constantly. layered with the rumble of laughter, excited debates, and the occasional echo of kids diving in where they weren't allowed. The water was hot enough to sting your skin, then cool enough to refresh, because aqueducts carried endless streams of fresh water from mountains miles away. Fires heated baths day and night. Even the poorest citizens could spare a small fee for a wash. Cleanliness wasn't a luxury, it was expected. Now you notice the water trickles slower, with silt collecting where bright streams once gushed. Cracks stretch across once smooth walls. The pipes, long neglected, struggle to carry more than a thin, murky line. Cold water fills the pools, if they fill at all. As aqueducts fall into disrepair, the baths take the first hit. These systems demand regular attention. Men to clean channels, replace pipes, patch leaks. That work was once guaranteed by civic funds, by officials eager to impress the community with shining public spaces. By the mid-400s, money is scarce, and those jobs get skipped. When soldiers can barely get wages, no one hires engineers to reseal ancient waterworks. Bricks crumble, weeds crawl into joints, lime deposits choke the piping. What was once a minor leak becomes years of loss, until half a bathhouse shuts down. And those still open don't feel the same. The water pressure's weak, the pools are shallow, the heat unreliable. You're left with tepid puddles, where you once had marble pools deep enough for swimming. The worst part isn't even the inconvenience. It's what happens when you live without the baths for long. In a world without soap the way we know it, without constant laundry, and with summers that leave sweat clinging to tunics, the bathhouse was your health system. No baths, no daily wash. And without that ritual, bodies quickly turn foul. Dirt sticks to skin until rashes flare up. Lice find easy homes in unwashed hair. Fleas spread without mercy. People crowd into the same rooms, unclean, coughing, carrying disease on their very skin. You used to step out of the baths refreshed. Now you sit in your villa, scratching under your clothes. The smell of sweat and sickness becomes the air you breathe every day. And you remember what the baths used to mean beyond hygiene. They were the living pulse of the city. Business deals made in the hot pools, arguments settled in the changing rooms, friendships played out under vaulted ceilings. The baths were half parliament, half parade ground, half festival, all rolled into one. Lose them, and you don't just lose a bath. You lose your daily arena where communal life made sense. Now, instead of meeting acquaintances in the steamy spaces filled with murals and mosaics, you sit in your home and watch the dust collect. Without that regular public face-to-face, the town feels quieter, empty, in ways deeper than silence. And that emptiness eats at everyone's morale. Picture walking past what used to be the centerpiece of your neighborhood. The huge entryway still towers, columns weathered but proud. Above them, weeds sprout from cracks where roofs once held firm. The door stands ajar, hinges rusting. Step inside and torchlight barely reveals shattered tiles. Mosaics cracked into jagged stories. Water stains creeping down painted walls. The great pools you played in as a child lie dry. Nothing but stone basins with rats skittering across them. The smell is no longer steam and oils, but mildew and wet stone. Where once there were musicians, trainers, healers, even food stands selling bread and honey, you now hear every step echo against bare walls. This was once the mark of pride. We are Romans. But now, it's the mark of loss. It's not that everything collapsed in one dramatic night. Nobody blew up the aqueducts all at once. Instead, it was the slow failure. A leak left untended, a gate unrepaired, a ceiling crack ignored until it fell with a storm. One small gap after another, until the proudest symbol of Roman comfort looked like a ruin lived in by ghosts. War drained funds. Trade disruption cut off supplies of marble, tiles, even olive oil for cleaning. Taxes went to plugging holes in the military instead of maintaining luxuries. And the baths, those supposedly eternal centres of life, simply stopped working. Health changes when the baths fail. People grow used to dirt on their skin, grease in their hair, bugs biting at night. Infection spreads easier when wounds can't be properly washed. Crowds gather less, which makes information scarcer. You notice more deaths from illnesses that used to seem simple. Cuts fester, fevers sweep through, smells of rot hang heavier than before. It's not only that you feel unclean, you feel vulnerable. And not just in body, but in the psyche. If Rome can't keep its water flowing, if it can't keep its baths open, what else might give way? The thought that everyday comforts can vanish shakes the ground beneath you more than raids or battles in distant regions. This was your proof of civilization. We may struggle, but we always bathe. That's what you told yourself. Until suddenly, you don't. So, where do you turn for stability when your walls sweat with mildew and your neighbours are scratching like beggars? Who provides the daily security and pride that marble and water once gave you? By the middle of the 5th century, no single day saw the last bath closed. But gradually, entire districts lost them. Town by town, the structures fell silent, picked apart by scavengers hungry for bronze fittings and stones. Instead of flowing water in every neighbourhood, only a few scattered sites still function. And even then, they work poorly. Cold pools and unreliable hours. In a society measured by the luxury of cleanliness, Rome now staggers forward, covered in dust. When a city loses its public heart, fear has nowhere to go but inward. The spaces where you shared heat and laughter become ruins, where you share nothing at all. And as each public hall fades, the silence gets heavier, pressing down on private homes, filling them with unease that once had no room to grow. You walk into the marketplace, once a riot of colours, shouting voices, and the smell of fish and herbs, and the first thing you notice now is silence. Where there should be crowds cramming shoulder to shoulder, half the stalls stand empty. Canopies flap loosely above tables with nothing on them but dust. Even the air feels wrong. Instead of roasted chickpeas or spiced wine, you get the staleness of bread left too long and vegetables about to rot. The place that once swelled with traders from every corner of the empire feels more like an abandoned forum where people wander out of habit, hoping for something that isn't there. You remember the days when the docks groaned under the weight of arrivals. Ships packed with grain, olives, pottery, animals, cloth, all funneling in, all feeding the city. Now the piers look nervous. Merchants glance across the horizon and fear what sails might appear. The famous African grain ships that fed Rome for centuries don't arrive like clockwork anymore. Some are captured, others don't bother making the trip because the new masters of the seas, the Vandals, decide who sails and who sinks. What used to be reliable supply lines now feel like a gamble, and most of the time you lose. Without those ships, the city's stomach hollows out. The roads don't help either. You used to measure the empire by its paved arteries, smooth stone lines stretching beyond sight. Soldiers patrolled, merchants moved easily, caravans followed the rhythm of law and order. By 450 CE, every journey is a risk. Bandits wait on stretches that once were safe. Bridges collapse and no one repairs them. Couriers disappear and messages end halfway. Goods rot in carts when stuck for weeks in mud or blocked by fallen stone. Farmers near the city try to carry produce in, but theft strips them on the way, and most return home with less than they left with. The capital shrinks not by walls closing in, but by the growing difficulty of feeding itself. Your routine becomes a game of rationing. A loaf that once cost a single coin now costs 3. Sometimes you wait in line for hours to buy what you can. and by the time you reach the stall, there's nothing but a pile of stale crusts. Bakers cut flour with husks to stretch supply. You chew bread that tastes like sawdust. If you're not quick enough or rich enough, you go home empty-handed. A neighbour might brag about securing a basket of figs, but the price he paid could have bought a pig just a generation ago. Nobody trusts money now, not really. The same coin feels worth less by the week, but worse than inflation is the uncertainty. Even if you scrape together every bronze piece, there's no guarantee there will be food waiting. The marketplace reflects Rome itself, a shell of greatness with rot inside. The plaza was once deafening, voices tumbling over one another, fishmongers yelling the day's catch, fruit sellers shoving figs in your face, spice traders waving samples under your nose. The chaos was intoxicating, but it meant life. Now each open stall is 5 closed ones beside it, shutters pulled tight, tables bare. The survivors look more like beggars than merchants, huddled behind a few sacks of grain or jars of stale oil, dodging desperate hands. Even the chatter is gone. Nobody boasts or bargains with joy. Instead, it's muttered exchanges, eyes shifting as though hungry neighbours might snatch what little is for sale. You can feel the emptiness most when you buy bread. Once, it was guaranteed. Africa's fields pumped endless grain into Rome, milled into the loaves you grabbed without thinking. Walk into town, get your ration, walk out again. Simple. That was the power of empire, a working stomach. With that gone, bread is no longer a given, it's a prize. That gap between expectation and reality crushes morale. Children cry in line because they don't understand why the bread ran out today, when last week there was plenty. No army needs to sack your home when hunger does the work quietly. Starvation doesn't always mean dramatic collapse. It means smaller meals every day, parents handing their portion to their kids while they cough through empty stomachs, neighbours whispering offers of extra bread if you owe them favours later. It's trading dignity for dinner. You see bakers close shops outright because they can't buy flour. Mills run dry without steady grain supply. The circle tightens with each missed shipment. The loss isn't abstract. It's in every skipped lunch that gnaws in your belly. The economy doesn't just shrink, it warps. Where grain ships once brought stability, now smugglers thrive. Someone whispers about small deliveries sneaking past the seas, charging outrageous prices for scraps. Buying from them feels dirty, but it fills your bowl for one night. A new hierarchy grows in the stalls themselves. Wealthy patrons who can always buy, poor crowds who wander away with nothing. The market transforms from Rome's beating organ of equality to a map of who still clings to privilege and who starves. Some try substitutes, barley bread instead of wheat, little vegetable cakes held together with onion and pulses. It fills space in your gut, but not for long. Meat disappears almost entirely, except for scraps salted to last week's, sold for fortunes that few can pay. Fish only appears when the sea is kind, and nearby fishermen dare risk raids. Every meal becomes a negotiation with chance. You don't waste food anymore. Crumbs are dinners. Bones boiled again and again until they crumble. The market stalls used to be pieces of a larger empire, connected by order and reach. Their emptiness now teaches you the reverse. Every missing basket of grain, every shuttered spice stall, every absent merchant is proof that Rome's hand has slipped. The city can't feed itself because it doesn't command safety on sea or land. Each bite of thin bread is a reminder of what was lost, not burned away in fire, but starved out through neglect, war, and broken promises. By the middle of the 5th century, this was life. No dramatic famine that ended everything at once, but relentless shortages, inflated prices, and constant lines that stretched longer than patience. Hunger became routine, and rationing was a part of daily life, just like waking up or going to sleep. When the market empties, You don't just lose food, you lose faith that Rome can ever provide again. It's the daily proof that the empire you live under isn't the empire that once was. And as your stomach aches and your meals shrink thinner by the week, you notice another presence creeping closer. Sick neighbours coughing through the night, fevers that pass door to door, pestilence carried not by hunger alone, but by the closeness of desperate bodies packed together. With food growing scarce, it's no longer only about empty stalls, but about the diseases pressing in from every direction. You wake up to the sound of your neighbour coughing, a deep, rattling hack that doesn't stop. You listen through the thin walls, counting each breath like it might tell you whether infection is creeping your way next. In the silence between coughs, you almost relax, until it starts again. When your eyes open in the morning, you wonder if today is the day you feel that same heaviness in your own chest. It's not fear of distant battle cries or raiders on the horizon that rattles you the most. It's the sound of one body in the dark, falling apart from inside out. Those stories about plagues no longer stay as rumours passed down from travellers. They aren't exaggerated tales that someone swears they heard from the east. Now they arrive in your very street. A fever appears in the nearest village, and within days it's in yours. 4 houses shut because no one inside is moving anymore. A week later, doors are left open to let out the stink of sickbeds. No survivors left to bar them. At night, the only movement you hear is the creak of wooden wheels, neighbours carting bodies out of homes barely 2 houses away from your own. Instead of the steady rhythm of markets or baths or chatter in the square, life is timed by coughs, groans, and the whispers of people praying not to get next. This wasn't the first time disease stalked Rome. Generations before, entire regions pitched into chaos during the Antonine Plague. They called it pestilentia because it felt more like a curse than an illness. People died by the hundreds every day in the capital alone. Now, years later, new waves never quite stop coming. Heat, crowded living, insects, all carry sickness faster than any physician can hope to control. Once a body falls sick, it doesn't matter if it's a soldier, a priest, or a farmer. Days later, the fever burns through them, the same. You learn quickly that life is fragile, not because of blade or spear, but because a cough in the wrong room can bring down a household. You walk outside and see homes looking perfectly intact, roofs solid, walls straight, but their windows dark and cold. Nobody lives there anymore. The family you traded olives with last season vanished one by one until only silence remains. Doors hang ajar, furniture dusted over, children's toys still scattered on floors where no feet step. It's not rare. Entire alleys turn into quiet lines of abandoned homes, as though half the city decided to leave in a single night. You don't need plumes of smoke or ruins to see collapse. You just count how many houses no longer send up the smell of food at supper. The priest is one of the only figures you still see moving steadily. He comes cloaked, staff in hand, marking crosses over doorways, blessing groups too large to bury one by one. Sometimes you swear he mumbles faster with every pile that grows, knowing tomorrow will just bring more. What used to be a single funeral with the whole community now becomes heaps of corpses in trenches at the edge of town. You look away when you walk near them, but the smell reaches you anyway, clinging to the air, to your tunic, to your nostrils until you taste it even at home. And it's never just plague alone. The sick fall harder, faster, because many are already half-starved. Grain rations shrink, stomachs ache, and bodies thin. When disease arrives, weakness lets it carve through skin and bone quicker. A scratch left unwashed grows red and swollen, because clean water has grown scarce. Famine and pestilence aren't accidents appearing one by one. They march side by side, feeding each other. Crops fail, or raids cut off supply. Hunger weakens families, and the fever sees its opportunity. When you see someone collapse in the street, it isn't just cough. It's months of thin meals and nights without rest. Even if you survive, the sickness doesn't leave silently. You carry it after it fades. A cousin recovers, but can't walk without pain anymore. A friend doesn't regain the strength to lift his tools. Children who survive cough for months, their bodies thinner than ever. Survival is not simply living, it's living scarred. Faces bear marks of sores healed badly, limbs left fragile, lungs that heave too loud with every climb of a stair. You notice fewer strong men in the fields, fewer women gathering water at the streams. Disease carves not only graves, but weaker survivors who struggle to carry the work that keeps communities alive. As deadly as it feels, the sickness isn't an enemy you can shut out with walls or forts. Rome's greatest strength, its vast web of roads, ships, markets, is now the rope tightening around every neck. Traders who bring goods also bring germs. Messengers who race news between towns carry more than letters. Soldiers marching together spread fever from encampment to encampment. The very size of the empire means once the sickness starts, you have no chance of outrunning it. Rome, massive, proud, connected, becomes a trap. Where you once found security, in belonging to something so huge, you now find dread, knowing every village is one step away from joining the infected. You can't run to the countryside for safety. Sickness follows there too. You can't seal off the city. It cracks open with movement, trade, war. You can't even count on prayers because the priest himself coughs between blessings. Maybe medicine helps a few, but most remedies are herbs, charms, whispered words. Faith fights harder than science. By the middle of the 5th century, sickness is not an exception. It's routine. Another companion lurking in every corner, like a familiar shadow. You don't ask if disease will come back. You ask when. The list of fevers and plagues doesn't stay written in books. It is written in absences, empty places at tables, entire workshops closed, teachers without pupils, families that only last a season longer before losing half their children. It is in the constant shuffle of the living making space in cemeteries running short of ground. You fold this reality into yourself until death doesn't shock you anymore. It just passes your street like a cart moved on 2 wheels creaking under weight. You watch it and wonder if you will ride that cart next month or next year. By 450 CE, plague and fever have become the quiet background to every other disaster. War shreds the borders, markets starve the cities, but disease is personal. It slips under the door regardless of rank, wealth, or allegiance. Every cough, every fever, every cold sweat feels like a warning bell ringing just for you. You live day by day, hoping to avoid notice, to last another round. The empire falls around you in politics and wars, but the greater fall may be inside bodies, collapsing silently, one household at a time. And as you watch corpses carried past your home again, you realize your body is vulnerable, but so is your home itself. Disease doesn't just hollow families, it weakens entire communities, leaving walls less guarded, gates less watched, food less grown. And when the home falters, memory of fear grows louder, the memory of fire, of invasion, of what happened when Rome's heart was pierced before. Even decades later, the whisper of fire still lives in the city. Every Roman child grows up hearing it. Remember what they did in 410. You weren't alive when Alaric's Visigoths breached the gates, but the memory is not something history books hold. It's something your neighbors mention under their breath, the kind of warning told when the night grows long and the wind rattles the shutters. To live in Rome after that sack is to carry a scar in the mind, even if your own hands never touched the ash. The irony hits each morning you walk through the streets. The city wasn't leveled like a field after flames. It still stands, domes lifted against the sky, temples casting shadows familiar to anyone who grew up here. But those same stones hide deep gouges of memory, gardens where once nobles displayed wealth now stretch bare. Palaces along the Palatine no longer gleam with polished marble, but sag with boarded windows or fresh coats of plaster hiding looting scars. When Alaric's men swarmed in, they didn't leave every building smoking, but they left families ruined, estates stripped, and treasures melted into memory. And memory is heavier than any ruin. You hear it in how people walk, the quiet tip of sandals past heavily locked gates, the way guards posted at still-standing villas check doors twice before nightfall. Every creak of wood on the main gate sends a ripple through the crowd, heads turning at once. Rome was supposed to be untouchable, eternal, the myth on which the whole world balanced. That illusion ended the moment the gates opened to outsiders. Now, no matter how calm the streets look, you know under the surface, the city lives in flinches and jolts, a population that always listens for the next battering ram. You remember as a child climbing stones with other kids, and some older cousin pointed to a blackened mark on a wall. He whispered it was from Goth torches, though by then the stain was weather-worn. Maybe it was true, maybe not, but nobody doubted it. What mattered was the reminder. For all the marble, all the senators, all the golden statues and processions, barbarians had stood where you stand now, torches lifted. That mental picture never leaves you. You see in your head flames licking mosaics, treasures poured into sacks, noble women hiding behind broken shutters. Even if you didn't watch it, you breathe in a city that did. Walk near the homes of the aristocracy, and the damage is still visible. Villas, once coated in imported marble, are stripped, columns missing, bronze fittings taken long ago by hands not Roman. Some families never came back after fleeing, their houses left half abandoned. Squatters creep in, or new families try to patch together the shells, but lack money to restore them. You see wealthy streets that now look like patched-up villages, mosaics cracked into tangled lines, walls reinforced with wood where marble sections once gleamed. Charred rubble never fully cleared stands as untended monuments, reminders that nobody could fully erase what happened. Even in churches, meant to offer refuge, people whisper about the sack. Priests point to the survival of holy places as proof of divine protection, but others mutter that the Goths spared them for political convenience, not holiness. Either way, worship feels different. Stepping into a basilica is stepping into Rome after trauma. You're not just kneeling to pray, you're kneeling under vaults that somehow survived foreign hands rummaging through imperial households. Religion gains a sharper edge because fear hangs near the altar. Life shrinks after such an event. Romans used to boast that their city mirrored the world, absorbing riches from east to west. Now it feels provincial, despite its size. You notice how people look more closely at one another, trust curdled into suspicion. Strangers aren't interesting anymore. They are potential threats, outsiders who could be the next Alaric's men in disguise. Every fortune teller finds more listeners, because when the Empire's Great Guard collapses once, you assume it can happen again, and the economy underlines it. Families that lost treasure never recover their status. Markets that were plundered never reopen the same. Poverty lingers where riches once thrived. For the elite, the sack is a humiliation that never fades. Senators used to sit as masters of an unassailable city. After 410, they sit with the knowledge their own halls were ransacked by men they called barbarians. Some cling to pride with desperate speeches or luxurious gatherings, but you can taste the hollowness in their words. Even the poorest know. The eagle standard faltered, the crown cracked. The imperial might look hollow, paper thin against axes and fire. Rome no longer sets the tone of history, it reacts to it. That shift weighs heavier on identity than on stone. And if trauma is measured in how people build trust, then post-sack Rome is a cage of caution. Neighbours bolt doors earlier, travel less, hide valuables deeper. Aristocrats construct private walls around estates, not for boasting, but for survival. Families once eager to host open banquets now shrink their invitations down to a handful of known friends. Fear changes community life, replacing open streets with guarded courtyards. The sack doesn't just live in blackened ruins, it transforms how people view each other. A city that prided itself on confident openness now moves like a man glancing always over the shoulder. Think of your own reactions. You weren't there during the sack, yet you feel divided into a before and after, just the same. Those older than you describe the night of invasion not as history, but as the boundary that split their lives. Even new generations step into that burden automatically, sensing that their world rests on borrowed time since the day when outsiders proved Rome could bleed. It's not just about remembering flames, it's about living with the knowledge the illusion is gone forever. The roads leading out of the city, once avenues of triumphal marches and military victories, now feel like escape routes. When caravans leave, you can sense people measuring whether they should follow. There isn't the same idea of permanence. Even the skyline itself, shrines atop the hills, broken statues at certain corners, seems like ruins waiting for the next assault. You don't admire Rome as much as you squint at it, wondering if it will still stand 10 years forward. So what does it feel like, living decades after the sack? It feels like life pressed into a narrower space. Traditions continue. The Senate still meets, farmers still sell in markets, bells still call worshippers. But under every sound lies tension. Every crack in the wall looks like a wound waiting to reopen. You don't see Rome as eternal anymore. You see it as fragile, surviving purely on habit and luck. Trauma reshaped the rhythm of every street. And this is the true mark of the sack. Even if your hands never touched a burnt wall, even if your family wasn't forced out of their home or looted clean, the event lives inside you as though it happened yesterday. The boundaries of time reorganize themselves into before and after. Rome survived outwardly, but inwardly the confidence that once radiated like sunlight across its empire is gone. That confidence doesn't return. When the strongest city you know proves fallible, you start searching for anchors elsewhere. If Rome can't protect itself, if the emperor can't stop the gates falling once, who do you turn to when the next disaster comes near? The question doesn't linger unanswered for long. You start looking past emperors, past generals. You start looking at figures already in your community. Men with authority closer to your life. Men who care whether you eat tonight. And that begins to change what Romans expect and to whom they swear loyalty. When no one knows who the emperor really is, who do you turn to for leadership? That's the problem hanging over your head in the 5th century. Names of emperors change faster than seasons, and sometimes 2 or 3 men claim the throne at once. To you, it doesn't matter whether they rule from Ravenna, Rome, or even Constantinople. They are far away, surrounded by squabbling generals, and their orders never make it to your street. Yet you still need food, medicine, judgment, and someone with authority to prevent everything from dissolving into chaos. And when the empire stops giving, you start looking elsewhere. By 450, the local bishop isn't just some holy man standing at an altar. He controls the purse strings of charity, the grain stores gifted by wealthy patrons, and the networks of men willing to carry those resources where they are needed. He doesn't wait for tax collectors or bureaucrats. Half of them have fled or gone unpaid anyway. He acts on the spot, and you notice. Instead of senators arguing in distant halls, you see the bishop handing bread into the palms of the hungry. Instead of imperial officials enforcing order at the market, you see the bishop's clerics watching trade to make sure desperate fights don't erupt. Leadership steps off the marble stage of empire and enters your daily path in the form of a man in robes. You feel the absence of Rome's bureaucracy every day. governors aren't at their posts. They retreat into their luxurious estates, reinforcing country villas while ignoring the actual towns. Tax collectors fade or become predatory, draining the last coins from those who can't resist. Soldiers lapse into unofficial bands who demand supplies instead of offering protection. In that vacuum, bishops become the only steady figures with structure behind them. Their authority comes less from law and more from necessity. Because when no one else shows up, the person willing to organize food distribution becomes by default your leader. And when he also happens to claim divine backing, people listen. Imagine standing in line by the church doors, waiting with others who look as tired and starved as you. Instead of announcements from imperial messengers, you hear deacons calling families forward to collect small sacks of grain. Some hug them as though they've been handed gold. In another corner, sick men are brought inside, laid on benches near where monks crush herbs into simple remedies. Children gather in side rooms where clergy teach them letters and recite prayers, functions once paid for by the state, now folded into the church. The bishop presides over it all, not as a distant voice, but as the visible head of a new system shaping itself in the ruins of the old. Legal conflict doesn't stop just because governors retreat. Disputes over farmland, inheritances, unpaid debts, they still happen. But instead of waiting for magistrates who no longer come, you bring your case to the bishop. His word carries weight. People accept his decisions because he represents fairness in a time when fairness is collapsing. He has resources to back judgments, guards to ensure agreements stick, food to reward compliance, excommunication to punish refusal. He is lawgiver, court, and enforcer all at once. If you want stability hot on your doorstep, this is the man you align yourself with. In a single building, the church, you find pieces of structures that once were scattered across the city. Hospital, dining hall, school, courthouse, even storage warehouse. Romans once measured status by association with the empire. Loyal service, offices, citizenship tied to central power. Now, the line bends. Status comes from being close to the bishop, receiving his assistance, or showing your loyalty in religious ways. The cloak of empire has faded, but a new one wraps just as tightly. It smells of incense instead of iron, but it works. This shift changes the rhythm of community life. You used to gather at the baths for gossip and business. Now you gather at the church courtyard. You once looked for senators leading processions in coloured robes. Now processions belong to the clergy waving crosses. You once listened for imperial edicts announced in marketplaces. Now you listen for the bishop's sermons, offering not just salvation of the soul, but advice for your family's survival. In every way that matters, civic identity shifts from political to spiritual leadership. And because it happens slowly, you don't notice the moment of change. You just find yourself living in it. Wealth follows this change too. Aristocrats once displayed power by restoring public infrastructure or hosting games for the city. Now they donate to churches, hoping their gifts buy heavenly favor while also protecting their reputation locally. Those donations don't vanish into palaces. They become sacks of wheat piled in church storerooms or oil lamps handed out to the poorest. Each act binds the donors closer to bishops who distribute on their behalf. Rich households that might have abandoned towns altogether instead tether themselves to the clergy for influence. And poorer families like yours benefit directly, noticing which leaders actually keep you fed. Of course, not everyone welcomes the change. Some cling to the emperor's image on coins, still swearing loyalty to men governing from far-off palaces. But as your stomach growls, whose face matters more? The one stamped in fading bronze, or the one standing at the church doors passing out bread this morning? Even if you admire the empire's grandeur, admiration doesn't fill your bowl. People adjust their loyalty in the most practical terms imaginable. The bishop also becomes protector when violent bands move too near. Fortified estates may guard their own tenants, but within towns, the church increasingly becomes the refuge. When raids threaten, people gather at its solid doors, trusting the sanctity of the building or the reputation of its leader to shield them. This isn't just symbolic. A warlord cynical about imperial threats may hesitate before crossing a bishop with half the town behind him. The bishop may lack an army, but his weapon is unity. And unity is rare in these times. It means that survival strategies change. Instead of looking up to Rome for concrete help, you look sideways, into your own community. When choosing where loyalty lies, the decision becomes clear. You still might whisper prayers for Rome's endurance, but your actual allegiance is tied to the immediate provider. The man who keeps hunger away tonight claims your respect more than a distant official guarding fading titles. It's practical loyalty, rooted in daily life, not in dreams of empire. So do you still call yourself a loyal Roman citizen, forever tied to empire? Or do you find yourself, bit by bit, loyal to this new figure who embodies power closest to you? The question doesn't rattle unexpectedly. It emerges every week at the church door when you accept relief, or when disputes are settled by clerical courts. Rome taught you to expect grand civic gifts, but with the empire a ghost, the gifts come robed in cloth marked with a cross. This is how ordinary Romans built new safety nets, piece by piece. They leaned into bishops, powerful patrons, and local protections in place of the empire's promises. The pivot from emperor to bishop wasn't dramatic, no single decree replacing one with the other. It was the quiet surrender to reality. In a city where famine struck, sickness spread, and old power dissolved, the man who remained visible, feeding, judging, protecting, that was the leader who counted. Even if it meant letting go of the dream that the empire itself would return to save you, you survived by reaching for the networks closer to hand. And when you swear fealty to food, protection, justice, and healing provided locally, the old idea of empire fades more every day. What does it mean when your loyalty isn't tied to Rome anymore, but to the man whose soldiers sleep a few steps away from your house? It means survival has changed hands. For centuries, being Roman was supposed to guarantee protection, order, and stability. But by the mid-400s, that promise is so thin it feels like a joke. Legions don't stand at the borders, governors vanish, officials retreat into dusty villas, and you're left staring at the road, guessing which band of men will walk down it tonight. Not the emperor's, someone else's, someone local, someone who can keep you alive if you give him what he wants. You and your neighbors talk less about serving the empire and more about serving the man on the closest fortified hill. There's no ceremony. You don't stand before him and swear loyalty in grand words carved on stone. Instead, it happens slowly. A raid threatens your area, and you run to his villa because its walls rise higher than your own. When he opens the gates, you notice his guards carrying reliable weapons, their armor repaired, their torchlights steady in the night. You survive inside those walls. And from that moment, you know, your life rests not with Rome at large, but with this one patron. Think about it from his side. He's a landowner, wealthy by inheritance or by gathering up abandoned plots after neighbors fled. He has farmland stretching wide, scattered outbuildings, storehouses filled after every harvest. He watches the collapse of central power and realizes he's now the anchor. Rome won't stop raiders riding in. Imperial edicts don't secure his barns. So, he arms himself. Maybe he hires mercenaries. Maybe he keeps loyal tenants well fed in exchange for carrying spears. Maybe he mixes both. His men aren't polished legionaries, but they're disciplined enough to protect fields and livestock. His villa doesn't just look like a home anymore. It looks like a fortress, thorny with wooden towers, a ditch dug deep around the walls, gates thickened with iron. It doesn't feel Roman. It feels feudal before feudal has a name. Now step into your own position. You have a farm too small to defend alone, maybe a vineyard or a few acres of wheat. Without protection, you lose it in one night when raiders come through. You weigh your options. try to keep independence? You'll likely starve, or watch your family dragged off by whoever has a sword. Lose independence, but join the warlord's protection system. Your life shrinks, your obligations grow heavier, but your family makes it through the winter. It's not a proud choice. It's a practical one. You pay him grain each season, not through taxes anymore, but through tribute. Half tax, half protection fee. You give him labor, sending a son to join his war band. Dead weight vanishes from your sense of free citizen. You're now defined by whom you belong to. This exchange reshapes daily reality. The emperor's authority feels like mist you can't grab. You never see him. His letters take months if they arrive at all, and his image is just a fading stamp on your coins. But your warlord, the man, the patron, the protector, you see him often. His guards pass your land. His messenger collects tribute. His squad keeps raiders off the road. The empire is abstract. The warlord is flesh and blood carries more power in desperate times. Still, the cost hurts. He demands loyalty not only in food, but in people. Maybe he asks for you to turn up with the rest of his men when he marches out. Because he isn't just shielding his land, he's expanding his strength through raids of his own. Suddenly, you find yourself putting on armor for the first time, shield heavy in your hand, marching with neighbors who'd never before thought of themselves as soldiers. Your identity fractures. Are you still Roman? Or are you now only one link in a warband chain following a leader who claims no imperial title at all? This is where history shifts from empire to feudal bonds. It doesn't look like a grand reform. It looks like desperate bartering. Food for safety, sons for guards, loyalty for shelter. There's no gleaming law that writes the change into official record. It lives in arrangements you make at your doorway each month. That slow trade, independence for security, becomes the foundation of a new order that doesn't vanish when the old empire finally does. What starts in fear becomes the skeleton of the Middle Ages. And once you commit to a warlord, leaving isn't so easy. You depend on his protection too much. Refuse tribute, and you're cast out beyond his walls, exposed. Anger him, and you face not just raids, but retaliation. That dependency twists you tighter into his control. If he fights rival warlords, you fight with him. If he salts his bread with blood from other villages, you quietly obey and guard the spoils he brings home. His shield covers your family, but under that shield you surrender freedom you once associated with being part of Rome's citizen body. Sometimes the price feels reasonable. Your children sleep at night without screaming from raiders outside. Your animals remain in their pens. Your fields aren't burned to ash. The roof still leaks, but you live. Other nights, after long marches with the warband, you ask yourself how much you gave away. You carry the weight of serving one man instead of an abstract empire, and you see the lines of the future forming. This doesn't look like empire. It looks like layers of smaller loyalties stacked across the countryside, each peasant bound to a patron, each patron bound to a stronger one higher up. The irony is that you never meant to give up the empire. You meant only to survive a single season, but each season binds you more deeply. Your loyalty slips quietly from emperor to patron, not because you desire change, but because you value safety. Each sack of grain handed up ties you closer. Each raid survived seals the deal. Each night in the fortified villa, when you listen to raindrops striking the shielded roof above, reminds you why compromise felt necessary. The dream of Rome dulls into memory, while the reality of your warlord's shield stays firm. You might lose autonomy, but you don't lose life. And at the end of the day, breathing matters more than pride in old titles. Even if you mutter prayers for empire's renewal, the bread on your table tonight came from a man who has no crown, no empire-wide reach, no eagle banners. He guards his land and yours and demands your loyalty in return. It feels small compared to the grandeur of Rome, but to you, it is the only scale that still means anything. So by survival you adapt. You surrender the rights you thought permanent. You align yourself with patrons who provide what emperors no longer can. And when you look forward, you see the shadow of something new forming. A Europe not of citizens bound to an empire, but of vassals tied to lords. This isn't empire fading and disappearing. It's empire reshaping into the skeleton of the Middle Ages. And you, standing at the gates of your warlord's villa, torchlight flickering on the walls, are already part of that new world taking shape. Living in Rome's dark times didn't mean one sudden collapse. It meant grinding adjustment, day after day, piece by piece. You didn't survive by clinging to marble halls or imagining armies that no longer marched. You survived by shifting loyalty, by trading abstract promises for the grain in your bowl tonight. The old imperial dream slipped away, replaced by a network small enough to see. What faded was the empire, not its people. They carried shards of Rome forward, rituals, language, memory, stitching them into something new. From those fragments, a harsher, smaller, but lasting world slowly formed, the beginnings of medieval Europe. Thanks for watching History Fueled. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and let me know your favorite part of the video in the comments. Good night.